Flying low over the Afghan treetops, an elite unit of special operators from 3 different American military branches and the Afghan army huddle together tightly inside their helicopter. The mood is tense, the night is dark. Each man prepares for the dangerous mission in his own way. Some tell lighthearted jokes or make small talk. Others focus intently on what's to come, constantly rehearsing his own role in the matter, while the rest simply sit in silence, contemplating what tomorrow will hold as the days tick down until they rotate home. They've been waiting for hours at this point until the call finally comes over the radio to go into action. American forces on the ground have radioed for assistance, and it's their job to help accomplish the mission. As they cut their way through the humid Afghan night, they can see their landing zone barely visible over the treetops. The massive helicopter they're in starts to slow and make its descent. "One mic out," roars the pilot over the radio. The men start to stand and brace themselves for the mad dash they're going to have to make once the helicopter touches the ground. They're checking magazines and weapon conditions while tightening the helmet straps they loosened for the ride over. Then, disaster strikes. With no sound, no warning, the aircraft bursts into flames. There's a tremendous explosion, and within 5 seconds, 31 American and 7 Afghan lives are lost. But what exactly happened to Extortion 17 to cause it to go down in a ball of fire and cause one of the largest single-day losses of life in 21st century American military history? Qari Tahir, Taliban commander and linchpin of the Taliban resistance, needed to go down, either arrest or termination. The man was too dangerous to be left alive. To get its man, the U.S. military turned to a mix of Navy SEALs, Air Force pararescue men, explosive ordnance disposal, U.S. Army Rangers, and Afghan commandos. Tahir was in charge of all Taliban forces in the Tangi Valley of the Wardak province. This was a strategic area since it was only 60 miles from the Afghan capital of Kabul, where Taliban fighters had been launching deadly attacks in the heart of the country with near impunity for years. American and coalition forces had tried repeatedly to control this region, but it remained effectively a Taliban stronghold. After multiple operations to subdue the region with little success, American commanders were ecstatic when they received reliable intelligence that Tahir was going to be located at a compound with a lighter than usual bodyguard. This presented the perfect opportunity to not only cut the head off the snake of the local Taliban, but it would enable the coalition to gain valuable insight into how the Taliban were so successfully able to elude their best efforts to contain them. American officers knew from the beginning the mission was going to be high risk. The compound where the supposed meeting was taking place with Tahir was in a terrorist hotbed with little to no support from locals. Making matters worse, the natural geography of the valley presented only one way in and one way out, an easy kill zone for enemy defenders. Compounding these difficulties was that there was almost zero illumination that night, meaning the pilots and crew would have extreme difficulty seeing any incoming fire and have less time to react than usual. Lastly, if that were not enough, Taliban fighters had started to become much more active at night in response to the increased use of night raids by special forces in the area. In short, American forces were going up against a well-entrenched, battle-hardened, and experienced enemy who had geography and the cover of darkness on his side. Definitely not the most ideal of circumstances. American commanders wanted to keep the element of surprise, but were prepared to engage whatever enemy forces they might find. The plan of attack was to insert a platoon of Army Rangers by the compound who would then sweep in to capture Tahir while he was in the building. The Navy SEALs and their accompanying support personnel would be on standby at the forward operating base they were based out of. This force was intended to be the reserve force in case the Rangers did not succeed or needed help before the target could get away. 2 Apache attack helicopters, an AC-130 gunship, and multiple intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft were tasked with providing support to the mission. At approximately 22:58 local time, the Ranger platoon was inserted into the objective. At about the same time, friendly aircraft noticed a group of 8 Taliban fighters walking in a single-file line north of the compound. One of the Apache gunships opened fire and killed 6 of them, while the other 2 were sent fleeing into the night for their lives. Over the next several hours, the Rangers battled to control the compound. By about 2:45 in the morning, the compound was secure with no sight of the Taliban leader. It was thought that the leader had fled before the Americans could arrive, and that his most trusted fighters made a last-ditch effort to delay his pursuers long enough to give him time to escape. The theory was backed up by the fact that the two fighters who escaped the initial attack by the Apache gunship were joined throughout the firefight by more and more Taliban, making their group between 9 and 10 members by 2:15 in the morning. American commanders believed that Tahir was among these fighters and that the action needed to be taken immediately to prevent his escape. It was then decided to send in the SEALs. During the firefight with the Taliban at the compound, American planners assumed that the Taliban commander would be alerted to their presence and make his escape. That's why, at 0100, local preparations were already underway to insert the Immediate Reaction Force, or IRF, that comprised the SEALs and their supporting members. The landing zone that was picked out was thoroughly studied before and was previously approved for earlier missions, but never utilized. The pilots that flew the aircraft were also extremely experienced, with thousands of hours of flight time, including hundreds of hours of combat experience. The helo was also blacked out, meaning absolutely no light emissions were allowed from the aircraft, which could give an easy target for any Taliban gunners below. The one precaution that was the most sound was also the most controversial. The two CH-47D Chinook helicopters used to insert the Ranger platoon earlier were also utilized for the SEAL insertion, but instead of splitting the men between the two aircraft, they were combined onto one. That would prove a fatal mistake. Why it was decided to put the entire IRF team in one helo was actually a matter of sound operating principles utilized throughout the war, and especially in this area. Multiple helicopters would present multiple targets to the Taliban, especially in the most vulnerable landing and takeoff phases, when the helos would be unable to utilize their missile defense measures or maneuver to safety. Safety concerns may sound extreme, but this threat was not some figment of the imagination. Over the past several months, there had been at least 4 attempted downings of helicopters by Taliban fighters using rocket-propelled grenades and other small arms. Though wildly inaccurate and basic, these weapons were still a force to be reckoned with in the hands of the right user and with a bit of luck. As fate would have it, luck would be on the Taliban's side that night. As Extortion 17 made its way over the treetops and slowed its speed to about 50 knots or almost 60 miles per hour, while also dropping to between 100 and 150 feet, the helo made its approach from the northwest and was trying to touch down near some fields as it had to pass over several qualats, or mud buildings, on the way down. It was here that the Taliban fired between 2 or 3 rocket-propelled grenades at the aircraft. The first one missed, but at least one other hit its mark. The warhead exploded near the end of the aft rotor blade, taking off over 10 feet of blade. This in turn caused a simultaneous catastrophic failure of the aircraft's integrity, which quickly brought it down in a matter of seconds. In the mangled wreckage of the once mighty Chinook, there were no survivors. Immediately after the downing, the circling Chinook helicopter radioed that they could see the other aircraft burning and needed help. The Rangers quickly broke from the compound and rushed over to the wreckage. Once on the scene, they immediately set up a perimeter to prevent the Taliban from swooping in to finish off their comrades, and they started searching for survivors. Unfortunately, by the end of the morning, the search for survivors was complete, and all 38 on board were confirmed killed. An Army ground convoy was dispatched to transport the remains, and additional Special Forces units were called in to help sort out the wreckage. Once all the remains were loaded onto the convoy, recovery efforts began in earnest. What the Army wanted to know from the wreckage was why one of their most combat-tested aircraft suddenly and without warning plummeted from the sky. Had it been a freak accident? Was it a mechanical failure of the aircraft? Had the Taliban acquired some new advanced weapon systems capable of downing aircraft with ease? The answers to these questions and many more were sought not only by the Army, but by the families of the deceased, Central Command leadership, and the U.S. Congress. Initial reports from the Taliban stated that the weapon that brought down the helicopter was a standard RPG commonly utilized throughout the country, while some locals speculated that the Taliban had in fact acquired a new weapon from Pakistan. These reports were unsubstantiated and not backed up by the investigation conducted by the Army. The Army wanted to know how such a weapon, with a max effective range of a little over several hundred yards, could take down an aircraft with only one shot. To prove this conclusively, the Army fired a similar weapon system at the exact same blades and was able to replicate the damage perfectly, thereby concluding that without a doubt, an RPG could in fact cause such catastrophic damage. But what of the Taliban fighter who fired that 1 in a million shot? Apparently, after the battle, American forces intercepted radio communications from him bragging about what he had done. However, the celebration was short-lived. Several days later, he and the Taliban leader, who was the focus of the failed raid, were cornered and killed in an airstrike. A follow-on team confirmed their deaths after the fact. Extortion 17 was brought down by a lucky 1 in a million shot, and sadly, over 3 dozen of the US and Afghan military's finest were all killed in the span of seconds. While many doubt the official investigation and insist something else must have happened, the sad truth is that that's just the way war goes sometimes, even if that fact brings no comfort to the families of the deceased. Now, for more of the best military content, check out this video right now, or this one instead.